Welcome to the 13th video in the Marine Invertebrate Biology course. This is going to be talking about phylum Annelida, the segmented worms, but we are going to start with a little bit of revision. We're talking about the difference between a two-way gut and a one-way gut. If you remember from Cnidaria, the food will go in and out the same entrance, and the same with Platyhelminthes. And then with Nemertea, we saw that the food would go one way through the body. So the same with these earthworms, like here, this is a segmented worm, and it'll have the mouth here, and the food will go in and then go down through the intestine and out at the very end of the body, the out through the anus, and that will be a one way. Okay, food only goes one way. So what are the advantages? There are two advantages to having a one-way gut that allow you to get bigger and more efficient. And what we notice here is the pharynx, which is a way of making sure that food goes in one direction and not the other. It's sort of a muscular little container that can manipulate the food, crush it up a little bit, and pass it back down through the esophagus. And then we get into the crop and gizzard, which are grinding organs, which can also have a little bit of digestive function. But these things will grind up the food so they get much smaller particles. And as we know, as particles get smaller, the surface area to volume ratio gets larger. And so with more surface area, the digestive enzymes have a chance to work on that and digest those particles at a much faster rate. So with much faster rate of digestion, then you can absorb more material quickly. And the other thing about this is that it allows continuous eating. So we have two different advantages. You have one is efficiency, efficiency. I'll let you finish that off for times. And two is continuous eating. Continuous eat. Okay. Sorry about the terrible handwriting there, but continuous eating. So that's why that's important, is that once you get a little bit bigger, you're not grazing on phytoplankton. And even when you are grazing on phytoplankton, in the natural world, in the marine and other environments, what happens is that often you find that food is patchy. So food isn't always there, and there are going to be times of lots of starvation, but also times when there's a lot of food. And when there's a lot of food, you want to be able to eat as much as you possibly can, digest it, and store it as energy. When you think about a lion eating 15, 20 kilos of meat off of one kill, and then sleeping for days and days, it will be trying to eat as much as it possibly can when times are good, because there will be times when starvation is inevitable. Well, let's talk about the phylum Annelida, which are segmented worms. These are different than the Nemerteans that we saw that didn't have segments. A little slideshow. They can be what we're familiar with the earthworms, and these things can get huge in Australia. But more likely, we're going to be looking at marine worms, marine polychaetas, and these things are very diverse. They look something like this. You can see the segment. They have beautiful appendages like these filtering appendages on Christmas tree worms. This is another tropical worm, but look at how beautiful this is. This is called a fireworm. They have these little things called urticating hairs, which are they're stingy. And here are some little tube worms where you can see the little feeding antenna off of these little tubes that they've built on a sponge that's very small. This is one from taken by at Pilot Bay near the Maori Warrior, which is a whole lot of fan worms. This is one called a spaghetti worm. Normally the body would be in a burrow, but it's been taken out so that you can see the body with its segments and the intestine going through it. But these are filter feeding deposit feeding appendages, these sticky things, and they look a bit like spaghetti. That's why we call them spaghetti worm. This doesn't really look like a typical segmented worm. You can start to see the same body plan of other annelids. And let's see if we can get this movie going. So I think I have to escape and play this. This is one of the smallest annelid worms. And here you can go. It's sucking up little single-celled things. It's a 0.5 millimeter long and it's full grown. But we can still see the segmentation going on. Right, here's a segment, here's a segment, here's a segment. And those, you can also see these little things called parapodia, and setae growing off of the edge of it. And those are important diagnostic characteristics. Here we go in the Chetogaster here, these little hairs and appendages off each segment. All right, so 3 classes of annelids. The phylum is Annelida, which means little ring. Okay, and there are 3 classes that you'll be responsible for knowing. The Oligochaeta, or earthworms. These are the terrestrial ones you're very familiar with. Then there are things called leeches, which are Hirudinae. Okay, this one is a medical. This one's being used to reduce swelling in a medical situation. They can reduce swelling by sucking blood. They're still used for some medical applications. And finally, the Polychaeta, which we'll be spending the majority of the time on within this phylum. And this one is one that has new individuals budding off the back that will eventually break away and grow into new adults. But you can still see all of the appendages, or sorry, the segments and the appendages off of the side of the body. So the oligochaetes don't have these little appendages. Well, they have a small hair called a setae. Hirudinae don't have these appendages off the side, and polychaetes do have the appendages with a fleshy lobe off of each segment. All right, let's look at the physiology. So we see that there are these repeating segments, which are noted by the sort of groove around the outside of the body. And each of those segments look exactly the same. If you took a slice, it'd be like slices of bread with the same thing on the inside. Or if you sliced a cucumber or something like that, each section would look very much like the next section. So if we remember the term septa from the actinarians, those were corals and the like. They were ones that these were these little divisions. They were membranes that divided the sections of the polyp. And now these things, the septa here, are the divisions. Now that's a membrane that divides the individual segments. Okay, and they have organs. They've developed organs, and quite a lot. So each segment will have the intestine hooked up together to the next segment as the blood vascular system hooked up. It's got nerve cords hooked up, and all of that goes through the whole length of the body. But these segments can seal off if like say, an earthworm gets bitten and has enough reserves to grow a new head or even a new body, then the segments can seal off and start to regrow that other portion of the body. So they have amazing powers of regeneration. Okay, so when you think of how these things move, they have a ring of circular muscles that can and circular muscles and longitudinal muscles. So the circular muscles, if they contract, will allow the segment to expand this way, and the longitudinal muscles will allow the segment to expand this way. And when you see a couple of the videos on YouTube about how these things move, then you'll see that each segment can either lengthen or shorten, and also increase in diameter or contract in diameter. So when it increases in diameter, it has more purchase on the surrounding sediment or the environment, and that can anchor it as other parts of the body stretch through the sediment. So you get these longitudinal waves of contraction that help these things move. We'll see that in a YouTube video. So here's another example of it. So you get these, again, longitudinal muscle contractions, and that's called peristalsis or peristaltic contraction. Exactly the same way that food is moved through your intestine. Okay, reproduction. In oligochaetes, they have these things called clitellums, which are the area that stands out, and this is an oligochaetes, and these things are hermaphrodites, so they line up with the clitellum and these seminal ducts lined up, and then exchange sperm and go on their way, and then lay eggs while they're moving through the soil. And with the oligochaetes, they eat just about anything that's organic, that's in the soil or on top of it. That's why you'll see earthworms sometimes out on wet nights. They'll even come up, but they tend to crawl through the soil, being deposit feeders, and they, by doing so, are incredibly important in aerating and turning over soil and then fertilizing it as well. Without earthworms, we would have a very different ecology. That's it for video 13. We will come back and look at class Polychaeta in the next video on phylum Annelida.